Hey, stories of the soul, fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love romantic story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us. The champagne glass trembled in Annie's hand as she watched Mark kneel beneath the string lights on the yacht's deck. The night had been stitched from the sort of moment she had pictured since childhood: laughter drifting across water, the warm press of his palm, a ring that caught the light like a secret. "Will you marry me?" he asked, voice steady and certain, like everything else he did. "Yes," she laughed, breathless. "Do." The word felt like currency, like a coin stamped with all the careful plans they built. The estate with white pillars, the parties where names were knotted at the right time, the life that fit snug and tidy into checkboxes. Mark was efficient like that, loving in the way you hire a gardener to keep your roses in order. It suited her, most of the time. Then the storm came. They had been on the boat for only an hour, when the horizon ruptured into a wall of black. The sea boiled and heaved as if some giant beneath it had shifted. The captain's curses were sudden and panicked. Ropes snapped like tendons. The yacht, which had felt safer than an arranged life, bucked and pitched until metal barked and groaned. Annie remembered the sharp, small panic in Mark's eyes as he clutched her hand. There were flashes of rope, of cold water, of someone shouting, "Get below, get below," and then an enormous impact that sent her colliding with a bulkhead and rolling into a world that tasted like iron. When she woke, she was on a beach that seemed otherwise untouched by humanity, a crescent of sand that smiled up at a dense line of palms. Her wedding dress wet, torn, stuck to her like a second skin. The yacht was a memory of splinters and screaming waves. Mark was nowhere to be seen. "Hey," she shouted into the heat that made the air shimmer. The only answer was the lazy cry of gulls. She stumbled up the shoreline, numb fingertips searching, throat full of an absence that felt like a fist. That's when she saw him. A figure moving near the tree line, lean and quick, as if the island itself had spit him out. He wore a ragged shirt, sun-browned skin, and hair the color of driftwood. He looked up when he heard her, and for a moment his expression was only surprise, then a smile that was both practiced and genuine. "You okay?" he called, his voice carrying across the sand. Annie's first impulse was suspicion. Stranger, island, survival. The words of every cautionary tale her parents had told her flitted up like moths. But when he crossed the last strip of white and knelt to offer her a canteen, his hands were steady, unthreatening. "My name's Alex," he said. "Come on, you can sit. Drink." He introduced himself like someone giving someone else a blanket. Matter of fact and uncomplicated. The island, he explained, had been his rough paradise for months. He'd been shipwrecked himself once, he said, and learned how to coax fire from damp sticks and fish with nothing but a cord and a sharpened stick. "You can call me Cruiser if you like," he added with a wink. "Or Friday. Names don't mean much out here." That night, under a sky that held all the stars, Alex gathered driftwood and built a fire that turned the darkness into gold. He fashioned a crude spear and taught her how to use it, how to feel the rhythm of the sea in her hands. He moved with an easy competence that made her heart unspool in unexpected ways. His laughter when a fish flopped free. His gentle chide when she tried to scoop water with her palms. At first, survival was a blunt instrument. They scavenged flotsam for useful things. Alex taught her to split coconuts, how to tie knots that would hold a hammock taut against the wind. Days bled into each other until the island's rhythms became a language. It was a primitive, elemental life, hungry, raw, bright. It pulled at the parts of her that had been numb from a life curated by other people's expectations. But the island did not only strip things away, it revealed other things too. In the quiet after a shared meal of grilled fish, Annie found herself telling Alex stories she had never voiced aloud, how she'd wanted to be an artist and had once painted the side of her family. The garage in secret, how she'd learned to sew dresses from scraps while the house slept. He listened like someone memorized by the cadence of her voice. He never told her to be careful. He never reminded her of decorum. He simply looked, and that made space for her to show. "You're different when you're not in a dress," he said one evening, humor rolling out of him like warm bread. He had braided a thick cord and fastened a pendant. Lady found what looked like a polished piece of green glass onto her neck. "You're less thinking and more being." She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, that he could make her forget, even for a moment, the weight of a ring. The polished cadence of Mark's promises was both thrilling and terrible. The romance of their island existence was not a tidy thing. It was a dangerous luminosity that magnified everything. There were moments sudden and electric when she would catch Alex's hand and feel the current between them. Once, as they watched the sunset melt into the sea, he whispered, "I want to kiss you," and the world narrowed to that breath. They kissed, knees tangled, hearts galloping like startled birds, and for a brief, dizzying second, she believed in a life that had nothing to do with plans or ledgers. Yet beneath the near-perfect mirage lurked a thread of suspense as taut as a violin string. Nights were the worst. The sounds of the sea became a chorus of possible dangers. On a morning when a search helicopter's shadow sliced across the sand like an accusation, she dared to hope. Then, when she saw faint footprints in the sand that weren't their two sets, hurried, indecisive, her stomach bottomed out. "We're not alone," Alex said, voice flat. His jaw clenched around the word. He moved like a man who had been betrayed before. Her life before the island had been a geometry of careful choices. On the island, decisions came with sharper edges: to trust, to act, to run toward, or away. When a rescue boat finally appeared on the horizon days later, it should have been a simple Salvation white hull, uniformed men, the scent of oil. Instead, the boat cut closer, and a face she knew all too well rose among the crew. Mark, hair wet, eyes scanning in an expression that was equal parts relief and calculation. He stepped onto the sand with a propriety that looked absurd against the wild backdrop. "Annie," he said, as if reading from a speech he'd practiced for years. "Thank God," we thought his words fizzled. The look he gave Alex, though, was not gratitude. It was ownership. The way one might appraise a new piece of property. "You're lucky we found you," Mark told her, but his next words were aimed at Alex. "Who's this?" Alex met his gaze without flinching. "You helped me," Annie said. Words came out steadier than she felt. "You should be thanking me," Mark said sharply, stepping closer. There was something behind the casual anger, a coldness that felt like a locked door. "You should get back on with us. We've got a hotel, a doctor, people who can help." Annie's relief at seeing a familiar face warred with something darker, a slick, sharp pressure of expectations returning to claim her. On the boat back, as the island shrank into the distance, Mark kept his hand in hers a little too tight. He was saving her, perhaps. He was also reclaiming the story he had begun to write for them both. Back in civilization, the world tried to reassert the life they had mapped out. Interviews with the press, polite dinners with concerned relatives, offers of compensation from insurers. Mark moved through it with the same professional ease with which he had proposed. But Annie found the trappings hollow. When she pulled a curtain, Anne saw Alex's silhouette on a television screen. An island being discussed on a news segment, her stomach lurched for homesickness in a way she had never imagined. She found herself thinking of the green glass pendant often. She thought about being less thinking and more being. She thought about the way Alex had laughed when the first mango fell from the tree like a clumsy meteor, and how his fingers had guided hers around the spear, as if they were making music. One night, as the city hummed with a life she no longer fit into, Mark turned to her and said what he had to say in the cool, precise way he said everything. "We can go on with our plan, Annie. There's a wedding to plan, people to meet. This," he gestured around their artfully curated apartment, "is your future." She felt the envelope of that future tighten like a noose. "Do you love me?" she asked. Mark's eyes flickered, and for the first time she saw the shadow of something else: fear, perhaps. "I love the life we'll have," he answered. It was the honest, awful truth. That night, unable to sleep, Annie took the pendant out and pressed it to her palm. The glass was cool and smooth. It was a piece of the island she could carry. She thought of Alex threading a fish on a spear, his laughter like a threat against the smug, comfortable life she had been assigned. She called him. The number she had a faded scrawl in her journal, connected to a voice that sounded surprised, then warm. "Annie," he said, as if saying her name was a small miracle. They met in a park, under an old oak, and when she saw him, the world felt like the hinge of a door reopening. "You can't go back," he said, blunt and tender. "Not to that. I don't know what I can do," she whispered. "I'm engaged. I have obligations. I have everything." "Everything," Alex echoed the irony. "Is that what you want?" Her throat closed. She wanted to answer with certainty, but the life she had known was a delicious, heavy habit. She loved the idea of Mark's assurances, the way a bird loves the shape of a cage that keeps it fed. The danger, when it came, was quieter than she expected. It began with his family's subtle remarks about choices, questions about how the island might have loosened her sense of priorities. Then came an ultimatum from Mark, an offer cloaked as generosity. "We'll leave it behind if you want," he said. "We'll buy you anything. Take the estate. It will be easier." The way he said it, offering her money as if it could mend things, broke something inside her. Alex's image rose in her mind. The man who had taught her to spear a fish and light a fire, and more important, to choose what she wanted rather than what was decided for her. The final night came with a confrontation that felt inevitable. They met in the dim lobby of an old hotel, one of Mark's more tasteful arrangements. He stepped closer than necessary, and his voice dropped. "This is about appearances, Annie," he said. "If you leave him behind, if you go back with me, we can pretend this never happened." "You mean bury the truth," she said. "By silence, buy back a memory." "Yes," he said simply. "It's simpler." Something in her snapped like a brittle branch underfoot. She thought of the way Alex's hand had steadied the spear in her fingers, of how he'd taught her that survival wasn't about hiding. It was about meeting the world with honest intent. "I choose freedom," she said, the words startling them both with their clarity. Mark's face hardened. "Then think about what you're choosing," he warned. "There are consequences." He meant it more literally than she had feared. The next morning, as she left the apartment with a single suitcase and the green pendant around her throat, two men she'd never met blocked her path. Mark's voice was on her phone, polite and small. "This is for your own good. It should have been terrifying. It should have been a trap that flattened her like a hand." But Annie had survived storms, built fires from wet wood, learned to move with the sharpness of someone who refuses to be owned. She slipped between the men like a shadow, and ran to the place where they'd first said goodbye to the island in old marina, where boats slept like beasts in the day. There, like a miracle or a consequence of fate, Alex waited. He had not come to reclaim her. He'd come because you do not leave someone you have seen survive the deep sea to the tidy hands of a man who bargains in appearances. Mark's men followed, but so did witnesses, the marina's fishermen, a pair of teenagers who'd seen enough movies to know how to call for help. And finally, the one thing Mark had never quite bought successfully: public opinion. The scuffle that followed looked ugly from the street. Mark's outrage, Alex's protective ferocity, Annie's fierce presence in the center of them like a lighthouse. The police came, drawn by the commotion. Mark's plans always depended on the quiet and the coordinated, frayed under fluorescent lights and real questions. In the end, Mark's threats dissolved into paperwork. His face was recorded in the same system he had once thought only useful for keeping his life tidy. Annie did not come away from it unscarred. There were things she had to face: shame at having believed security could be purchased, grief for the life she had once assumed she wanted. But she also came away with something sharper, a sense of choice. She chose the messy, luminous life Alex offered, not because it was easy, but because it asked her to be brave. They never fit neatly. There were nights when Annie missed the quiet order of her old life, and there were days when Alex's past murky in ways he didn't love to speak of bored into the edges of their peace. But they built a life that smelled of salt and sun and honest labor. They found a small house near the coast, where the windows looked out onto water that could be both treacherous and kind. On their second anniversary, less a calendar event than a beating drum in memory, they walked the beach where they had first met. Alex reached down, picked up a piece of sea-polished glass, and pressed it into her palm. "For you," he said, "to remember that freedom doesn't cost a thing, something you earn." Annie placed the pendant around her neck and felt it settle like a vow. Not to a man who promised gardens and neatness, but to a life she had chosen with eyes open to danger and beauty alike. She had been stranded physically, emotionally, and, in being found, had found herself. The island had given her more than survival lessons. It taught her how to choose love on her own terms. And when the wind blew over the sand that night, it carried the sound of their laughter, polished, real, and free.